your mouth and the vision that you have for the club can inspire not only the players but also the parents to be, you know.
Absolutely, yeah. I've got no problem with that at all. I think we can sit down and we can arrange a space.
I think it was a great job. I think you did a great job.
No, I appreciate it. Thanks, man.
Yeah, I echo what Travis said. The presentation will be videoed, or is currently being videoed, so hopefully we can use this as a tool.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Fantastic job, Chris. Thank you.
Okay.
Anybody else? While we have the expert up here.
Hardly. One thing I will say about player development as well, is living and breathing, okay? And what I mean is, once new research comes out, once new methodologies come out, new philosophies, it's ongoing. It's an ongoing thing. You know, you start to see it all over the world now. I think a perfect example was the Belgian FA. I think 2006, I believe it was. I think they were ranked 66th in the world, and they were like, well, how can we go from 66th of a world ranking, and how can we break that top 5, right? So anyway, within a 10-year period, they went from 66th in the world to number 1 in the world. So it took over. It was a 10-year period. So they basically revamped the whole curriculum from a coach education standpoint and completely changed things. So the reason, one of the reasons for that is, one, obviously they weren't being very successful, and two, the process of player development was changing, right? So I think sometimes what we need to do is not be satisfied with what we have and constantly look to try and tinker things and move things around to try and get the best we possibly can out of our athletes as well. So I just want to echo that as well.
Thank you. Anything else? Anyone?
Thank you, Chris. At this time, we are going to go over the sensitivity training portion, and we have, thanks to Tony, I'd like to thank him personally for going above and beyond to address this topic, and we'll have Dr. McCants come up at this time. She's from Francis Marion. Sorry, I don't have an extensive background. She could explain more than I can.
How's everybody doing today? Good, good. And thank you for having me. I want to thank Tony for inviting me to come and speak with you all today about diversity and inclusion and how that can be a sensitive topic. I know this can be a difficult conversation to have for some people because, you know, we're talking about differences. But before we begin, I want to just kind of mention some of the same attributes we all have. I think everyone in the room recognizes that we want our players to have fun on the field and practice good sportsmanship. Can we all agree on that? And I think we all can agree that we want our players to be successful in life even after school. Can we all agree on that? All right, so now that we can agree on some things, let's take a moment to talk about those more difficult conversations that sometimes happen. I wanted to let you know that I work at Francis Marion University, been there a little over 11 years. I work in the Office of Student Affairs. I'm the Assistant Vice President. We work with a lot of student organizations. We work with our international students. I work with cultural programming, so any of the cultural programming that you see on our campus, I kind of play a role in that. And the list goes on. So we do a lot for our students at Francis Marion. But what you probably didn't know is that a long time ago, I felt a little marginalized. I grew up in rural South Carolina, a little community called Britton's Neck. You probably never heard of it. It's in Marion County. It's between the city of Marion and Conway. So it's in that little neck where there's nothing but trees and fields, and it's a rural community. And so I left the community and I went on to do my undergrad at Clemson. And when I got to Clemson, it was a culture shock for me. I got there and, I was valedictorian in my class, and I said, I'm smart. I'm really, really smart. I will get through this, no problem. And I got to Clemson, and I realized that I wasn't as smart as I thought I was. I was competing against individuals who had a lot more opportunity than I had. And like Chris Williams said earlier, I had to develop a growth mindset. I had to learn that, I am not at the top of this. I am not at the top of the academics that I thought I was, and then so I need to learn from other individuals. And when we're talking about learning from other individuals, we're talking about focusing on our differences, appreciating those differences, and seeing how we can work together for a common cause. With that being said, I wanted to talk about some of our training objectives for today. I won't be before you long, but our training objectives are to provide a clear understanding between diversity, inclusion, and race sensitivity, to raise a greater awareness of sensitivity around cultural differences, to use scenarios as a guide to understanding our differences and creating great spaces for that, and to explore tools and resources to help us as we develop a positive environment for our athletes and fans. With that being said, before you, you have a handout. And it's a handout that was adopted by the University of Houston, and it's how does the world see you? We don't have to complete the handout here, but the importance of this handout is for you to understand that the way you see yourself might be different from the way others perceive you. And I want you to take this a little further, and I want to encourage you to have your students or your children, those athletes that you coach, to kind of look at some of these questions and think about them. And I think you'll be surprised at some of the answers they have. We're all different from different attributes. It's beyond race. Sometimes it's gender. Sometimes it's social economics. We grew up differently. And some of those differences might appear to have a negative connotation to it. But if we start that conversation early and we let individuals know that, we're here for the same reason, that will help us in determining how we can reach common ground. So with the handout that you had, the first question here is, what are some elements of your identity that you feel are obvious? And so we don't have to all, agree to say the same answers, but just think in your mind, what are some things that people can see? Some attributes. I've got black hair, or I've got blonde hair, or I wear glasses. These are some things that are obvious that individuals can see. And then the next question, what elements have made you feel different or unique? And are these in a good or bad way? Sometimes individuals might say, I might be a little overweight, and I don't like that. Or, I have an element where I'm fast, and that makes me a better athlete. Have you ever felt discriminated against because of one part of your identity? If you're going to flight school and you wear glasses, people look at you funny. It's like, well, are you going to be able to see while you're flying the plane? If you are interested in playing a particular sport, but you don't have that height requirement that most athletes in that sport have, people look at you a little differently. Do I think he's going to be a good player? We get that sometimes. And the last question, if you have a choice, are there elements that you are less comfortable sharing about yourself? What would you find yourself censoring or filtering about your identity? I can remember I had a student who would come to a lot of our events on campus, and she enjoyed those events. But when it came to one particular cultural event, she didn't want to participate as much. And I asked her, I said, well, why not participate in this cultural event? She says, because I'm not quite sure how people will perceive me. I come to events, but people ask me every day, where are you? And she was biracial, and she didn't want people to kind of noticed that about her, that she didn't want to talk about it. You know, she just wanted to say, well, I'm one or the other, and just be done with it. And that's the way she felt, because she's heard so many negative connotations associated with it. So we want to make sure that we have an atmosphere for our players that's positive, that everyone feels welcome, and that we take that everywhere that we go. We have a couple of key terms. So we talk about diversity, we're talking about a set of differences within a given setting. So it's beyond race. We have gender, we have sexual orientation, we have social economics, we have a large gamut of what makes us diverse. And I think it's important that we understand that we are all different in some aspect, whether we grew up poor or we grew up wealthy, whether we came from the west side of Florence or the east side of Florence, we are all different in some aspect. Inclusion, an atmosphere where different identities are accepted and appreciated. So when we talk about inclusion, we want to make sure that our players have the same playing field. If there's an athlete who might have a little difficulty because they have an injury, how do we make sure that they're included with everyone else when they're in an exercise or they're getting ready to perform some sports task? Same thing with accessibility. We're all in a space here, but sometimes we have to create an additional space to make sure that others have the same accessibility. So inclusion is making sure that we all have a place within the organization. And racially sensitive. This is fostering intolerance of racial prejudice to make an environment more peaceful. And again, this is a difficult topic for a lot of people to talk about. But when we mention race, it's important that individuals look beyond what they see on the outside. You know, if you look in DNA and ancestry, we are all made up of different components. But sometimes certain features come out more than others. And when there's a negative connotation associated with that, it makes people feel bad. So we want to make sure that we're sensitive to stereotypes, that we take into account if a student has had a bad experience and they're coming into our club, that we nurture that student and make sure that they know that they're in a place where they're going to be well supported. What we're going to do now is we're going to watch a video that's going to talk a little bit about differences, stereotypes, situations where the student or the athlete has no control over. But I want you to pay attention to how the video administers what we can do in those situations and how we can best foster a positive experience. It's called The Great Race.
The winner of this race will take this, a $100 bill. Before I say go, I'm going to make a couple statements. If those statements apply to you, I want you to take 2 steps forward. If those statements don't apply to you, I want you to stay right where you're at. Take 2 steps forward if both of your parents are still married. Take 2 steps forward if you grew up with a father figure in the home. Take 2 steps forward if you had access to a private education. Take 2 steps forward if you had access to a free tutor growing up. Take 2 steps forward if you've never had to worry about your cell phone being shut off. Take 2 steps forward if you've never had to help mom or dad with the bills. Take 2 steps forward if it wasn't because of your athletic ability, you don't have to pay for college. Take 2 steps forward if you never wondered where your next meal was going to come from. I want you guys up here in the front just to turn around and look. Every statement I've made has nothing to do with anything any of you have done. Has nothing to do with decisions you've made. Everything I have said has nothing to do with what you've done. We all know these people up here have a better opportunity to win this $100. Does that mean these people back here can't race? No. We would be foolish to not realize we've been given more opportunity. We don't want to recognize that we've been given a head start. But the reality is we have. Now, there's no excuse. They still got to run their race. You still got to run your race. But whoever wins this $100, I think it'd be extremely foolish of you not to utilize that and learn more about somebody else's story. Because the reality is, if this was a fair race and everybody was back on that line, I guarantee you some of these black dudes would smoke all of you. And it's only because you have this big of a head start that you're possibly going to win this race called life. That is a picture of life, ladies and gentlemen. Nothing you've done has put you in the league that you're in right now. When I say go, on your mark, get set, go! If you didn't learn anything from this activity, you're a fool.
Thank you. Did you guys find that a little inspiring? I've always found it inspiring, and I think that it's a great tool as we move forward, if not with athletes, with all of our students as we work with them. Some of the discussion questions moving forward with this particular video. So we want to ask ourselves, what was gained from this activity? Students realized that they came from all walks of life. They realized that, you know, they came from different parts of areas. Some grew up differently with a different environment, you know, a single mom or a single family home, while others had a nuclear family. And some of these aspects made them think differently, as, you know, I don't have that opportunity. You know, I don't have that extra boost of being able to go to a private school or taking advantage of all of the educational opportunities I had at a public institution. Some of them really had to think about a lot of different challenges they had to overcome. So I think it's important as we work with our student athletes and your children that they take this mindset and they think about their peers. And when they talk to their peers, if they're going through this, they could be a support system for their peers, and you all as coaches and administrators can do the same. Next question, what are some ways to combat feelings of inequity among our players? I think that it's important that as we bring players in, and I know you guys are growing, I think you have reaching almost 1,000 athletes, as you bring players in, that you teach them the importance of learning from others, sharing experiences. If it's no more than maybe taking a trip and learning about their differences, that will help them understand what it's like for their peers, and we can work together for a common cause. And then lastly, who are our stakeholders? When we talk about these types of exercises and we talk about diversity and inclusion, we're talking about the entire organization. We're talking about the coaches and the administrators. We're talking about parents. We're talking about our students and our children. We're talking about how do we move from point A to point B and be successful. With that in mind, there are a lot of different opportunities for these athletes when they graduate high school, when they go to college, and they need to have a mindset, again, that growth mindset that Chris talked about earlier, so that they could learn that there's differences and they might not be the best. You know, they might have competition, but it's okay. So that's great. So as we move forward to the next slide, wanted to talk a little bit about stereotypes, intentions, and outcomes. And when we talk about these types of items, it's important that, I think, for coaches and administrators to know that stereotypes exist. We all know it. We all know stereotypes exist about everything out there, whether it's about the gender pay gap, about the women need to be in one sector versus another, if it's about race, if it's about sexual orientation. There are stereotypes out there, and there's really nothing we can do about it. What we can do is channel how we take stereotypes and we learn from them. We can also channel the tensions that we have when we're talking about diversity and inclusion, channel those tensions so that the outcome is a greater outcome or a better outcome than it would be if we took those stereotypes and tried to manifest them into a situation that was not likely to happen. With that being said, there's another video that I want to show you, and it's a short clip talking about stereotypes. And when we talk about those stereotypes and those intentions and how sometimes the two get intertwined and the message gets mixed, it causes problems. Once you realize that that problem is there, it's how you communicate that solves that issue. And if we could go to the video at this time.
We focus way too much on intentions. We overlook outcomes. Outcomes are what matter. Intentions are part of the equation, but we need to pay more attention to outcomes. If you come, Nick, nice to meet you. If Nick comes to my house to visit, and we kind of run out of things to talk about, because I'm not a particularly interesting person to spend time with, if we run out of things to talk about, we decide to fill our time, we're going to go to my backyard and have some archery practice. And I get out the bullseye target, and I put that up on one side of the yard, and I get out the bow and the arrow, and I put the arrow in the bow, and I pull it back, and I aim for the very center of that target, and I shoot it. And instead of hitting that target, I hit Nick in the head. It's important for Nick to know what my intentions were, right? It's important for you to know that I didn't intentionally do that. But those intentions aren't more important than the fact that Nick has an arrow in his head, are they? But that's kind of what we do. We want to focus on our intentions. I see this in the workplace a lot. I hear people say, but she didn't understand what I meant. But you didn't hear what I said. Well, that could be the case, but that intention is only part of the equation. It's only one end of the stick. Arrows land where they land. Words land where they land. Practices, policies, and behaviors land where they land. And we need to own both ends of that stick, not just one. Regardless of our intentions, we still need to own where those things land. And we get confused about this, and we spend a lot of time thinking about intentions today. It's also a good reminder of the power of stereotypes. And I think sometimes when we get grown and we get business cards and business suits and we have the right intentions, we convince ourselves that we are no longer influenced by stereotypes. Only people that are uneducated or uninformed or unenlightened are influenced by stereotypes, not me, right? I'm here to tell you that that is wrong. You are all influenced by stereotypes, and we all will be for the rest of our days. It's part of human nature. We are inundated with stereotypical ideas and images. We'll talk a little bit about some of the science behind stereotypes this morning, but stereotypes find a lot of ways to influence our thinking and decision-making regardless of our intentions. One of the ways that they find a way to influence our decision-making is that they often provide the foundation upon which we make assumptions about people and groups and situations. If we go back and take a look at those 4 answers that came from the faculty at UC Berkeley, we'll see that they are connected to some commonly held stereotypes about African Americans in this country. If we'd have been talking about a different group of students at UC Berkeley, we would have gotten some different answers. And the difference would have been different stereotypes. Stereotypes provide the foundation upon which we make assumptions. So when our mind is at work, automatically filling in the gaps about people, one of the things that it is often working off is stereotypical ideas and images about race, appearance, dress, age, gender, any of those things. Stereotypes are another thing that find a lot of ways to influence outcomes.
Okay. So what he was talking about is how stereotypes, when they're looked at the wrong way, they can influence us differently. And so there are 3 scenarios I want to kind of let the group hear about. And I want you to just think for a minute how stereotypically the outcomes could come out. The first scenario is the star athlete. So, this is the person who You know, they get all the attention. You look forward to seeing them at a game. You know they're going to rack up a lot of points. They get gifts, getting closer to graduating from high school. They get opportunities. They get these scholarships to college. They are the star athlete. But what people might not realize is that star athlete might be having issues at home. That star athlete, that same star athlete, might not be able to financially pay for the things, the items that they need while they're in their home today. They may be helping a parent to pay for bills. But again, that's that star athlete, and our intention is to help that star athlete grow, but based off of certain stereotypes, that star athlete might run into some issues. This second scenario is the chess club. And for this, we're going to put a face to the chess club. So we're talking about someone who's very smart, ambitious, college-bound. If we were to see maybe an Asian student or maybe someone who we knew was very, very smart in class, or just by looking at someone, oh yeah, you look smart, you look very smart, you would think that this person, they're gonna be successful. They got great grades, they look successful, they're always studying, they are a president of this club and that club, but that's stereotypically what people would think. They might not know that this same person with this, what we call the chess club mentality, has an issue with drugs. The same person might actually be homeless, but no one would know that because they're going off of the stereotype that, this person is on top of their game, they look the part, they are going places, but you're not reaching out and seeing what is their backstory. And in scenario 3, we're talking about the all-star student. This all-star student, great grades, they're active in sports and drama, they've had an opportunity to study abroad, they've come from a middle-class family, they're going to do pretty good. But that's, again, is a stereotype. In this scenario, in this situation, this student may be grappling with depression. And this is not something that comes out in school. This is not something that is talked about at home. Parents are, pretty busy trying to make ends meet and live comfortably. So it's not something that comes out. And the student might be on the brink of suicide. But again, the stereotype is they'll be fine. They'll make it. And the reason why I wanted to bring these scenarios to you is because these, again, are sensitive topics that you might not see come from your athletes or your students by just seeing them or just by looking at them. And so it's important that we talk to our students to make sure that, they're doing okay, because sometimes they might not be doing okay. And maybe there are some issues or concerns that they want to talk about that might be bothering them. And again, this all ties into diversity because everybody has their own experience. When I spoke to you earlier and I said diversity goes beyond race, that is exactly what I meant. Diversity and inclusion goes beyond some of the facets that we're used to from years and years of talking about it. And so it's important that when we do talk to our students and we educate our students, that we include some of these same attributes. Maybe it's financial, maybe it's mental, maybe it's drug related. We need to make sure that we are reaching out to our students in that way. And then a couple of things moving forward. There's a best practices for diversity, inclusion, and sensitivity to those topics. We want to make sure we help our students and colleagues understand diversity and the tension that goes along with it. So as we talk about diversity and some of these topics earlier when we discussed, the student I had who was biracial, who really didn't want to talk about the fact that she was biracial, or if we had the situation where there's an athlete who may be grappling with an issue at home, we need to understand that there's tension that comes along with being diverse, with being different. And if we can come together on a common ground, if there are facilitated conversations that are in place, I guarantee you that there will be some positive aspect to helping our students cope with issues and tension that arise with diversity and inclusion. Keeping the lines of communication open. I can't stress enough to the individuals in this room, whether you are a coach, administrator, or parent, the importance of keeping the lines of communication open. I know this was echoed throughout this morning, and I'm going to echo it again. When there is no communication, that's when trouble arises. It's important that we keep in contact with our students, with our children, see how their day is going, if there's anything that they want to talk about, if there's anything that's bothering them. That's how we know that we need to take a step forward and see if there's something we can do about rectifying a situation early. Model how you treat others. So sometimes we have bullies, and we all are aware of bullies, right? We got kids in school that, they had that bully in the class that just picks on them and picks on them. When we talk about our student athletes, sometimes we'll have that same mentality. It might not be a student. It might be someone different, someone who they look up to. And so when we have a situation where there's a student who might feel marginalized, we need to step in and take care of it quickly. I think it's important that, just like you're having this session today, it's important that coaches keep abreast of these issues, because if a student doesn't feel like they're being treated equally, or they don't feel like they're being treated like everyone else, then sooner or later it will come up, and when it comes up, it will be bad. So I want to make sure that individuals are aware that everyone has a voice. We want to treat everyone like we want to be treated. It's the golden rule. And when we're talking about our student athletes, that they mimic the same thing with their peers. And then lastly, establishing a protocol for dealing with difficult situations. If a difficult situation arises, as a club, there needs to be something in place for a protocol. So if, we have a student where we found out that there are some family issues,